The headline sounded like a whisper turned into thunder. King Charles had quietly handed over the control of Buckingham Palace to the Prince and Princess of Wales. No grand ceremony, no televised address, just a private meeting inside the palace walls, where the monarch, with the weight of decades on his shoulders, passed along the practical levers of power to William and Catherine. It was, on the surface, a managerial decision. In truth, it felt like the beginning of a new era, and a potential fracture at the heart of the royal household. Inside the chamber, accounts describe an atmosphere heavy with both solemnity and inevitability. King Charles, still a figure of command but visibly more deliberate in his movements, addressed only a small circle of aides and his heir. The words he chose were described as simple but final. He spoke of continuity, of the need to preserve trust, of the responsibility to shield the monarchy from turbulence. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial despite the absence of cameras, he turned over the authority to William and Catherine to oversee the palace's daily operations, from scheduling royal duties to managing staff and ensuring the public face of the crown stayed disciplined. Those present recalled Catherine's posture. Upright, calm, every detail of her expression measured. William, by contrast, carried the visible weight of expectation. For years he had been prepared for this moment, yet when it finally arrived, the sense of burden was unmistakable. He nodded respectfully as his father's words concluded, but one aide said his jaw tightened in a way that betrayed the enormity of the role being placed upon him. What made the occasion even more striking was the decision to keep it private. Traditionally, the royal household makes careful use of public imagery to project unity. A photograph of Charles with William and Catherine might have reassured the nation. Instead, the palace chose silence. No photographs, no press release, only murmurs that leaked from within, fueling speculation before the story had even formed. That very choice transformed a pragmatic adjustment into an event ripe for rumor. Whispers began almost immediately. Why now? Why so quietly? And, most significantly, why was Queen Camilla absent? Her absence, more than any detail about the transfer itself, became the talking point. The Queen Consort, long seen as a survivor who had carefully rebuilt her image, was not in the room when the king symbolically entrusted the future of the monarchy to his son and daughter-in-law. For critics, it was proof that her influence had been clipped. For supporters, it was a scheduling matter spun into controversy. But in a system built on appearances, an empty chair carried consequences. The late Queen Elizabeth II had always understood that appearances mattered as much as actions. Her presence at key handovers, whether ceremonial or symbolic, offered reassurance. Now, with Camilla absent and Charles retreating further into silence, the palace inadvertently left space for narratives beyond its control. Commentators began calling the transfer a quiet abdication, an exaggeration perhaps, but one that resonated with a public already accustomed to interpreting every royal gesture as significant. What added fuel was the deliberate leaking of certain phrases to the press. Handover of the keys, stewards of the future, operational control. These words appeared in newspapers almost in unison, suggesting an orchestrated attempt to frame William and Catherine as the monarchy's natural leaders. The omission of Camilla's name in these reports was glaring, almost pointed. While William and Catherine were elevated, Camilla's absence from both the event and the narrative spoke volumes. For the king himself, those who know him insist this was not an act of exclusion but of pragmatism. Charles has always been a delegator, one who values the expertise of others. With William and Catherine enjoying public admiration and embodying stability, he chose to place them at the center of palace operations. Yet the optics cannot be ignored. Even if the intention was to protect the monarchy, the execution left questions hanging in the air. As the story spread, public reaction revealed the fault lines in how the monarchy is perceived. Many welcomed the decision, seeing it as a logical step toward the future. William and Catherine, after all, represent continuity and modernity in a way no one else within the family can. But others worried about division. If Camilla, the king's consort, was not part of this transfer, what did that say about the unity of the crown? Could the monarchy withstand visible fractures at its core? For now, the palace has chosen endurance over explanation. The king will say little. The Wolseys will carry on with their new responsibilities, projecting calm competence. And Camilla, silent in the face of growing speculation, remains the unanswered question hovering over it all. Her response, or lack of one, will determine whether this moment becomes remembered as a seamless generational transition or the spark that exposed fissures too deep to ignore. The cameras may not have been there, but history has a way of recording moments regardless. And in the quiet handover inside Buckingham Palace, history may well look back and see the beginning of a new reign in everything but name. The story that began as a whisper now echoed across London and beyond. While the details of the secret handover fascinated the public, it was Queen Camilla's absence that seized the spotlight. In the choreography of monarchy, nothing is casual. Every step, every glance, every placement of a chair carries symbolic weight. And when the Queen Consort's chair was empty, the meaning was too loud to ignore. Royal aides rushed to explain it away. Camilla had prior engagements, they said. Her calendar had been set long before. It was a matter of practicality, not politics. Yet the explanations felt thin. The late Queen Elizabeth II had always understood that presence mattered more than convenience. Even when she was unwell, she made an appearance or ensured her image was projected to avoid speculation. By contrast, Camilla's absence became the headline. Newspapers ran bold covers, "Left out in the cold," and "A Queen Consort without a kingdom." Talk radio buzzed with callers debating whether Camilla had been deliberately sidelined. Some listeners defended her, pointing to her decades of charity work and her quiet steadiness beside Charles. Others dismissed her as irrelevant to the monarchy's future, insisting that William and Catherine embodied the crown's survival. The palace remained silent. No statement, no photograph, no effort to fill the void. For generations, palace officials had learned the lesson that silence breeds speculation. Yet once again, the communication strategy was inaction. Into that vacuum, reporters inserted their own narrative. Coordinated leaks painted William and Catherine as the stewards of the future. Their faces adorned magazine covers, smiling, confident, positioned as the couple who would secure the crown's stability for decades. Camilla's name was nowhere to be found in these accounts. It was an absence that felt deliberate, even if it wasn't. By highlighting the Waleses and omitting the Queen Consort, the press reinforced the sense that the monarchy was already preparing to leave her behind. Even sympathetic commentators struggled to spin it positively. One analyst on a morning broadcast remarked, "The Queen Consort cannot afford to disappear. If she's absent too often, she becomes invisible. And in monarchy, invisibility is irrelevance." Meanwhile, insiders close to Charles insisted the move was not meant to humiliate his wife. They described the king as pragmatic, delegating duties to those best suited for them. He valued William's discipline, Catherine's public touch, and together they were the logical choice to handle palace operations. Camilla, they argued, had her own strengths, her charities, her softer public engagements, that complemented rather than competed with William and Catherine's leadership. Still, even those defenders admitted privately that the optics were disastrous. And then there was the public. On the streets of London, in cafes from Kensington to Notting Hill, people were divided. Some saw the handover as a natural evolution, praising Charles for recognizing that his reign was transitional, a bridge between Elizabeth and William. Others worried about what it signaled. If the king was already fading from view and the Queen Consort sidelined, was the monarchy unraveling its own sense of unity? Polls taken that week revealed a striking divide. Support for William and Catherine surged, with nearly 70% of respondents saying they trusted the couple to safeguard the monarchy's future. By contrast, Camilla's approval dipped, not because of something she did, but because of what she didn't do. In the public eye, absence had transformed into weakness. Behind closed doors, the Waleses themselves felt the shift. William confided to aides that he felt the ground tilting, as though every step forward carried the risk of alienating other family members. Catherine, ever steady, urged him to focus on duty, not the noise. She reminded him that public opinion was fleeting, but responsibility endured. Still, the weight was undeniable. By accepting the king's trust, they had also accepted the scrutiny that came with it. And in the silence that followed, one question remained unanswered. What would Camilla do? Would she step forward, assert her presence, and remind the world of her role? Or would she retreat, allowing the perception of her irrelevance to harden into fact? The palace, for now, chose endurance, waiting for the storm to pass. But storms, once unleashed, rarely obey the calendar. The transfer of power had been meant to strengthen the monarchy's foundation. Instead, it had exposed the cracks within. And the figure standing at the center of that storm was not Charles, not William, not even Catherine, but Camilla, absent yet unavoidable. The immediate fallout from Buckingham rippled outward, pulling the wider family into its current. For decades, the monarchy had survived by projecting unity. Yet in the wake of Charles's private handover, unity seemed more fragile than ever. Every relative not in the room began to feel the absence like a quiet insult. Prince Andrew, already disgraced and sidelined, was quick to sense his further marginalization. He reportedly told a confidant that the palace was becoming a two-person show, his words dripping with both envy and resignation. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, also felt the sting. They had maintained hopes of being more active royals, only to find the doors narrowing. "We're ornaments, not participants." One of them allegedly told a friend after reading the headlines that described William and Catherine as the exclusive future of the crown. From across the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan's reaction was predictably sharp. The Sussexes' circle suggested that the handover proved their long-standing complaint, that the institution protects some while discarding others. Meghan, according to a source close to her, viewed Catherine's elevated role as further confirmation that the palace was willing to erase inconvenient family members while crowning its chosen ones. Harry, more conflicted, reportedly described the handover as inevitable but cold, a move that left his father looking diminished. Yet amidst these frustrations and recriminations, one figure emerged with quiet influence: Princess Anne. Known for her bluntness and work ethic, Anne had never courted the spotlight, but insiders say she understood the stakes better than anyone. Behind closed doors, she urged William and Catherine to tread carefully, reminding them that the monarchy was not only about efficiency, but also about perception. "You must bring the others along," she is said to have told William in a private meeting. "Exclusion breeds rebellion, and we cannot afford rebellion now." Anne's role was not glamorous, but it was pivotal. She became the subtle mediator, speaking both to Camilla in private and to William in quiet conversations that never reached the tabloids. Her goal was not to stop the transfer of power, it was too late for that, but to ensure the family did not unravel around it. Still, the divides grew sharper. Andrew sulked on the sidelines. The Sussexes fed narratives to friendly outlets. Beatrice and Eugenie drifted further into private lives, their royal futures dimmed. Camilla remained the great unknown, her silence interpreted as resentment. And through it all, William and Catherine stood taller in public but more isolated within the family circle. The monarchy, once described as the firm, now looked more like a divided boardroom where only a few held voting power. Those left out were not irrelevant, they were restless. The more the Waleses shone, the more shadows lengthened around the others. And Anne, the quiet strategist, seemed to be the only one who recognized how dangerous those shadows could become. In public, the message remained polished. William and Catherine carried out engagements with grace, drawing crowds and headlines that reassured the nation. But beneath the surface, the extended family was fracturing, and in those fractures lay the seeds of future conflict that no carefully staged photograph could erase. By the time the story of the secret handover settled into the public sphere, it was no longer just about Buckingham Palace. It had morphed into something larger, something far more destabilizing, a question about the king himself. Was Charles preparing to step aside, or had the first cracks of an unspoken abdication already begun to appear? The press, always eager for a royal drama, latched onto this question with relentless energy. Front pages screamed speculation. Television presenters dissected every cancelled appearance. Even the faintest signs of fatigue were magnified into evidence of decline. Where once Charles had been the figure of renewal after Elizabeth's passing, now he was cast as a monarch already receding into the background. It began with the cancellations. 2 minor engagements, one a visit to a charity in the Midlands, another a ceremonial ribbon cutting, were quietly postponed. Official statements blamed scheduling adjustments, but the timing was damning. Coming so soon after the private handover of Buckingham operations to William and Catherine, it looked less like coincidence and more like confirmation. Rumours moved swiftly. Within hours, hashtags like #silent abdication and #king in name only trended online. Tabloids stoked the flames. The Daily Mail asked bluntly, "Is Charles preparing to step aside?" The Sun featured a grainy telephoto image of the king stepping slowly from a limousine, his shoulders slightly hunched, the caption beneath reading, "A monarch in retreat." Even the more restrained Times published an editorial musing on whether the monarchy was entering a period of accelerated transition. What made the storm especially dangerous was the absence of counter-narratives. The palace said nothing. No reassuring photograph of the king at his desk, no carefully arranged video of him greeting dignitaries, no appearance at the balcony to wave. Silence may once have been the monarchy's shield, but in an age of rolling news and viral images, silence was gasoline on speculation. In that void, public imagination did the rest. Television experts speculated about Charles's health with the confidence of physicians. Though none had access to medical facts, social media produced amateur sleuths who dissected every video of the king walking, zooming in on his gait, his hand gestures, even the color of his complexion. What had been whispers turned into a collective conclusion. Charles was fading. For Camilla, the timing was brutal. Already bruised by commentary about her absence from the handover meeting, she now faced questions about her relevance. Critics cast her as invisible, a consort unable, or unwilling, to assert herself in a moment of turbulence. Supporters tried to defend her, arguing that she was deliberately keeping a low profile to shield Charles from further scrutiny. Yet even they admitted the optics were damaging. A queen consort who disappears when the king is questioned looks less like a stabilizer and more like a passenger. The comparison with Catherine could not have been sharper. While Camilla stayed out of sight, Catherine stepped into visibility with effortless ease. She was photographed visiting hospitals, speaking with schoolchildren, walking confidently beside William at public events. Her style was polished, her words careful, her image unmistakably reminiscent of the late Queen Elizabeth's quiet steadiness. Media outlets noticed. Side-by-side layouts became common. Catherine's radiant presence contrasted with Camilla's empty chair. William's poised speeches contrasted with Charles's silence. The effect was devastating. Polling conducted by YouGov during that month showed trust in William and Catherine soaring, while Charles's approval stagnated and Camilla's dipped sharply. The monarchy was increasingly seen not as a pair of generations working in tandem, but as a torch already passed. For a monarchy obsessed with continuity, this was perilous ground. Inside the palace, aides wrestled with how to respond. One longtime courtier, speaking anonymously to a journalist, admitted, "We miscalculated. We thought people would see this as sensible delegation. Instead, they see abdication." Another added, The king is not stepping aside, but perception is becoming stronger than reality. Yet despite their concerns, Charles remained committed to his strategy. He believed in quiet pragmatism, delegating responsibilities to his son and daughter-in-law while keeping his own focus on state affairs. What he underestimated was the hunger of the press for visible monarchy. In the modern era, invisibility is indistinguishable from irrelevance. The frenzy spread abroad as well. American late-night hosts made jokes about Charles retiring early. European outlets framed William and Catherine as the new de facto rulers of Britain. Even in Commonwealth nations, commentators speculated on whether this was a rehearsal for the inevitable. Every headline that praised the Wolseys seemed to chip away further at Charles's authority. Camilla's allies urged her to step forward, to assert herself with a bold public appearance that would remind the nation she remained central to the monarchy. But she hesitated. For decades, her survival within the royal machine had depended on discretion, not visibility. Now that same discretion threatened to erase her. She doesn't want to compete with Catherine, one insider explained, but if she stays too quiet, she will simply vanish from the picture. For William, the sudden shift was disorienting. In private, he admitted to friends that he felt trapped between loyalty to his father and the weight of public expectation. "It's as if they want me to be king already," he confided. Catherine, ever composed, urged patience. She reminded him that his task was to support his father, not to replace him prematurely. Yet William could not ignore the reality. Crowds cheered for him as though he were already monarch, and newspapers called him the crown in waiting, with increasing boldness. As the noise grew, one figure remained acutely aware of the danger: Princess Anne. Pragmatic and unsentimental, she cautioned both William and Catherine to temper their rise with humility. She knew that if Charles appeared eclipsed, resentment would fester inside the family. "The crown survives on unity," she told them during a quiet meeting. "Once people believe it's fractured, it begins to fall apart." But unity was already slipping. Andrew sulked in obscurity. The Sussexes fed their own narratives from across the Atlantic, and Camilla wrestled with her invisibility. The monarchy's public face looked steadier than ever, William and Catherine shaking hands, smiling, projecting stability. Yet beneath that polished exterior, the fractures widened. By the end of the month, the phrase "silent abdication" had entered the lexicon of royal watchers. It didn't matter that Charles had signed no papers, delivered no speeches, made no declarations. The perception alone was enough to shape reality. In the minds of many, the king had already receded, leaving his son and daughter-in-law to shoulder the crown's symbolic weight. It was never supposed to happen this way. The handover had been intended as a simple adjustment of duties, a pragmatic shift in palace management. Instead, it had unleashed a storm of speculation that neither Charles nor Camilla seemed willing or able to calm. And as the cameras followed William and Catherine with ever greater intensity, the monarchy edged closer to a truth it had tried to deny. History was moving faster than anyone inside Buckingham Palace had anticipated. The storm that had begun as a quiet whisper within the walls of Buckingham Palace had now reshaped the monarchy itself. For weeks, speculation about Charles's health and Camilla's absence dominated the conversation. But slowly the narrative shifted toward inevitability. Whether or not the king intended it, William and Catherine had become the center of gravity. Their rise was not official, yet it was undeniable. Public events showcased the change most clearly. When William appeared at a military commemoration in Portsmouth, veterans cheered his name, chanting, "Our future king," as if the transition had already been sealed. Catherine's hospital visits drew enormous crowds. Photographs of her bending gently toward children made front pages around the world. In every image, she radiated the steadiness once embodied by Elizabeth II. The nation saw not just a princess but a queen in waiting, already carrying the mantle of continuity. Charles, meanwhile, receded further from view. He still held his audiences with the Prime Minister, still signed state documents, still fulfilled the formal duties required of a sovereign, but the public was less interested in what happened in private rooms. Visibility mattered more than paperwork, and in visibility, he was losing ground. Each week he stayed behind palace gates. The narrative of silent abdication grew more entrenched. For Camilla, this was a personal blow. Once described by friends as the king's indispensable companion, she now found herself portrayed as an afterthought. Tabloids referred to her in the past tense, as though her role had already ended. One columnist bluntly asked, "Does Britain still need a queen consort?" Her defenders argued she had never sought the limelight, that her strength lay in quiet support. But in an era where image defined relevance, quietness looked dangerously like irrelevance. Camilla tried to reassert herself. She scheduled a series of charity visits, focusing on her long-standing work with domestic violence survivors and literacy campaigns. Yet when photographs of these events appeared, they were overshadowed by coverage of Catherine's outings. The contrast was cruel. Catherine appeared as the polished heir, glowing in tailored suits. Camilla looked tired, her presence framed less as leadership and more as dutiful obligation. One headline summed it up brutally: "The future versus the past." Inside the palace, tension simmered. Aides loyal to Camilla pushed for greater visibility, arguing that the Queen consort could not be sidelined without weakening Charles himself. Advisors to William and Catherine resisted, fearing any forced prominence would only fuel further divisions. "We can't pretend it's 2005, one aide was overheard saying, referencing the year Charles and Camilla married. "The monarchy has moved on." William himself felt the strain. In private conversations with confidants, he admitted that stepping forward felt less like triumph and more like burden. He worried about eclipsing his father, about the narrative that painted him as an impatient heir. Catherine, ever composed, encouraged him to embrace the responsibility without arrogance. "We didn't ask for this moment," she told him, "but we can't deny it either. We serve, not compete." And serve they did. Their calendar filled with engagements once reserved for the sovereign, hosting foreign dignitaries, presiding over state dinners, even receiving ambassadors in London. The Palace Communications Office subtly shifted language in press releases, describing William and Catherine as central to the monarchy's daily life. Charles's name was still there, but increasingly in the background. The shift was not without resistance. Charles, according to palace insiders, bristled at suggestions of abdication. He reminded those close to him that he had waited longer than any heir in British history, and that he had no intention of stepping aside prematurely. "I am not a caretaker," he reportedly told one aide. "I am the king." Yet, even as he insisted on his authority, reality undermined him. Authority in monarchy is not only what one holds, but what one projects. And projection had become William and Catherine's domain. Princess Anne remained the voice of pragmatism. She warned her nephew that too rapid a rise could fracture the family beyond repair. She urged Catherine to maintain visible respect for Camilla, even when public opinion dismissed her. Anne's words carried weight. She had lived long enough to see how the monarchy stumbled when it allowed divisions to fester. Her counsel was simple: unity is survival. Don't mistake applause for permanence. Enfrentu. Beyond palace walls, the public seemed content with the new arrangement. Polls showed record approval ratings for William and Catherine, particularly among younger generations, who saw in them a balance of tradition and modernity. Internationally, too, their image carried weight. American networks devoted prime-time segments to the new royal era, and Commonwealth nations signalled comfort with the prospect of the Wolseys as their future heads of state. Yet beneath the acclaim lay an unspoken truth. The monarchy had drifted into a dual reign, one formal and one practical. Charles remained king in title, Camilla queen in law, but William and Catherine had become monarchs in practice. It was not a coup, not a scandal, not even a plan. It was the slow, relentless tide of perception turning into reality. Camilla, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. Friends described her as deeply hurt, feeling cut adrift after decades of standing by Charles. She had fought hard to be accepted, weathering years of hostility after Diana's death, only to find herself diminished at the very moment she should have been secure. Some urged her to fight back, to reclaim her role with bold appearances. Others advised retreat, letting William and Catherine shoulder the weight. Neither option seemed satisfying. She was queen, yet invisible, present, yet peripheral. In the end, the monarchy presented its most enduring paradox. Power was not always held by those with titles, but by those with visibility. William and Catherine, with their popularity and presence, had become the beating heart of the institution. Charles and Camilla, though technically sovereigns, appeared increasingly as shadows cast by their successors. As the year drew to a close, one final image seemed to capture the moment. On Christmas Day, the royal family gathered at Sandringham for their traditional church walk. Photographers lined the path as usual, snapping dozens of frames. The front row showed William, Catherine, and their 3 children, smiling, hand in hand, framed perfectly in the winter Sunday. Charles and Camilla walked just behind, their figures partially obscured. Newspapers the next day chose the Wolseys for the cover. The king and queen consort were cropped into the corner. It was not abdication. No words had been spoken, no crown relinquished, no throne vacated. And yet, in the eyes of millions, the transfer had already taken place. The monarchy had entered a new era, not through ceremony, not through proclamation, but through silence, perception, and the slow erosion of presence. William and Catherine had not seized power. It had fallen into their hands. And for Camilla, that was perhaps the cruelest twist of all. After decades in the shadows, she had finally reached the top, only to find that the world had already moved on without her.